Tonight we're doing something a little strange. You're stepping barefoot into the shadowy corridors of ancient Rome, not to watch a gladiator fight or toast with emperors, but to follow something smaller. Much, much smaller. As you glide down a cool marble hallway, torches flicker against mosaic walls, and from somewhere underfoot, you hear the softest rustle. Tiny claws. Quick, deliberate. The ancient Romans used mice to predict the weather, and tonight, so will you. Now, if that sounds adorable, it isn't. These mice aren't pets. They're twitchy little bundles of nerves living in dark corners of Roman kitchens, temples, even palaces. You're about to find out just how much weight those tiny whiskers carried. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this without being a little creeped out by the next mouse you see. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from some cozy corner of the world, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the atrium of a Roman domus, the home of a moderately wealthy family. The air smells of oil lamps, olives, and faint mildew from the walls. Somewhere behind you, water gurgles softly in a small indoor fountain. But it's not the water you're focused on. It's the sound coming from the cellar, the scurrying of mice. You head down a few stone steps into the semi-darkness. A servant leads you with a torch, clearly annoyed that you've requested to see the weather room, which, to them, just means the basement. But once you're down there, something clicks. The walls are lined with storage jars, grain, pickled fish, wine, but the far wall has a peculiar cage, one that doesn't match the others. Inside, half a dozen small mice, all twitching, sniffing, and rearranging their bedding like tiny over-caffeinated meteorologists. Their tails flick. One stands up and freezes. Another scampers into a corner, then back out. The servant grumbles, "Storm's coming." You blink. You ask how she knows. She just nods toward the cage. They always go wild before rain. This isn't folklore for her, it's household management. And the strangest part? She's right. That very evening, clouds roll in like a curtain being drawn across the sky. A sticky stillness presses against the walls. Then, distant thunder. Just like the mice said. Historically, Romans did pay close attention to animal behavior when anticipating the weather. Birds, yes. Frogs, occasionally. But mice, those were a domestic constant. The plebeians noticed first, perhaps. A change in mouse behavior before a flood or cold snap could mean the difference between moldy grain and a manageable winter. That twitching, that nesting frenzy, possibly a response to changes in atmospheric pressure or humidity levels, things we now track with fancy barometers and apps, but they sensed naturally. It's worth noting, Roman homes, even wealthy ones, didn't have insulation. They were open to the elements in ways modern homes aren't. Rain seeped through tiles. Heat baked the walls. So being able to anticipate a storm wasn't just a curiosity, it was survival. Historians still argue whether these mice were truly predictive or whether Romans simply saw what they wanted to see. Confirmation bias, we'd call it today. The storm comes, the mice act weird, and you connect the dots after the fact. But the pattern was so persistent that entire households began keeping forecasting mice as informal barometers. And not all mice were equal. Some were wild and sneaky, those ones were watched with suspicion. Others were caged and monitored, like the ones you're watching now. One mouse starts frantically scratching at the straw. Another curls up tight into a spiral. You find yourself leaning closer, oddly invested. It's strangely hypnotic. Then comes the first rumble of thunder, distant and round. Outside, the skies go from powder blue to bruised grey. You glance again at the cage, and every single mouse has frozen in place. You're not the only one who noticed. The head of the household arrives, a portly merchant with a robe slightly too tight and the permanent scowl of someone who's lived through more tax audits than family dinners. He snorts. Told you they'd predict it. You ask him how often the mice are right. He shrugs. More often than my brother-in-law, and he swears by goat entrails. You try not to react to that visual. He explains that, in his house, the mice get a special diet, constant bedding, and regular water. Not out of affection, but because they perform. Like little weather consultants, squeaking their observations. It's part of the rhythm of daily life: feed the dog, light the lamp, check the mice. A mainstream historical fact you might enjoy: Roman naturalists like Pliny the Elder did note the behavior of animals before weather shifts. Birds were common examples, but mice crept into these texts too, just not in great detail. Pliny was more interested in how animals interacted with divine forces, but mice? They were the subtle hint. The overlooked clue. Still, some records hint at certain houses treating their forecasting mice with the same reverence a modern sailor might show the barometer. If you knew a storm was coming, you didn't just grab an umbrella, you rescheduled weddings, harvests, even minor ceremonies. The mice didn't just warn about rain. They disrupted calendars. And there were superstitions, of course. Fringe beliefs. One rural legend claimed that if a mouse stood on its hind legs and sneezed twice, hail would follow. Historians roll their eyes at that one, unless they're the kind who secretly root for weird stories. You linger in the basement as the storm grows. The air thickens with ozone. Somewhere upstairs, a door bangs shut. The mice curl tighter. It's oddly calming, watching them. You realize that while Rome might be remembered for its wars and monuments, down here in the dark, a different legacy scurries quietly between shadows. One of observation, adaptation, and maybe, just maybe, something that looks a lot like science in a toga. You crouch lower beside the cage, watching the mice with a new sense of reverence. It's easy to dismiss them, tiny, squirming things with bead-bright eyes and whiskers like antennae tuning into a world you can't perceive. But you're starting to see what the Romans saw, something uncanny in their stillness, their sudden darting, the way they pause like they're listening to something you can't hear. One mouse stands completely upright. Its tiny chest pulses rapidly. Another burrows deep into the straw bedding, whiskers twitching madly. You tilt your head, just as the merchant from before murmurs, "Wind shift." You feel it too, subtle, a chill curling in through the stone vent near the ceiling. The air pressure drops ever so slightly. No one had names for these things yet, not in this part of the world. But the mice felt it. They always felt it. The Romans weren't scientists in the modern sense, but they were exceptional at practical observation. They noticed when mice stopped eating before a downpour, when they became restless, darting in and out of their burrows, or when they piled extra bedding days before a cold snap. Some even claimed mice changed their vocalizations, those faint squeaks becoming more urgent, more frequent, just before lightning cracked the sky. You're not alone in your fascination. Across Rome, across villas and villages, people are watching too. Mice weren't just tolerated, they were noted. Not every Roman household had them in cages, of course. Most just observed the ones already scuttling through pantries or under floorboards. A family might quietly point out, "They're gathering too much straw tonight," then glance at the sky. There's a fringe theory among modern researchers, quirky, not universally accepted that some Roman weather sayings were built entirely around mouse behavior. You think of those little rhymes that echo through time, like red sky at morning, sailor take warning, and imagine one lost to the ages, if mice run high, the rains draw nigh. Doesn't sound so ridiculous now, does it? You shift your weight on the cold stone floor. Outside, the storm is growing teeth. Wind rakes the shutters upstairs, and you swear the torch flickers in rhythm with each gust. The merchant lights a second lamp beside the cage. Not for the mice, they're comfortable in the dark, but for himself, for comfort. There's something about seeing them clearly, even as the world outside blurs with wind and noise. The tiniest mouse pokes its head from a shredded fig leaf. Its ears twitch, and it sneezes. Once. Twice. You freeze. The merchant chuckles under his breath. That one's dramatic. Loves attention. You realize these mice have names. Not literal ones, perhaps, but identities. Personalities. They've become part of the family, in a strange, unpaid in turn kind of way. Not cuddled, not adored, but respected. Listened to. Historians still argue whether the Romans genuinely believed mice predicted the weather, or if it was just an easy correlation. Some suggest it was less about faith and more about habit. You see enough mouse panic before enough cold snaps, and you start to trust the pattern even if you never understand it. That's not superstition. That's pattern recognition, low-tech and highly attentive. You stretch and notice something pinned to the cellar wall, a small wax tablet. It's filled with scratched-in notes, hastily carved, looping and irregular. The merchant notices you reading it and explains, it's a log. His daughter keeps track of the mice. When they stir. When they burrow. When they stop eating. She compares it to the weather the next day. He grins. She wants to prove it's real. Says she'll publish her own scroll one day. Weather by Whisker. You love that. One historical fact worth bookmarking. The Romans had no concept of meteorology in the way we do, but they did have their own rustic methods. Observation of the stars. Wind direction. The smell of the earth. And animals, always animals. Mice were just easier to observe up close. Less flighty than birds. Less noisy than frogs. You didn't need a pond or a pasture, just a warm corner and a crumb or two. And then there's the debate over Roman mouse whisperers. A highly fringe idea, but entertaining. Certain women, especially older matriarchs in rural households, were said to have a special connection with their household mice. They were thought to interpret mouse behavior more accurately than anyone else. Not priestesses. Not scholars. Grandma. You picture her now, apron stained with wine, leaning on a cane as she squints at the cage and announces, "Get the laundry in, it's going to pour." And no one questions her, not even the head of the house. That's power. The wind howls louder now. Rain lashes the tile roof above like spilled beads. You feel the cool, damp air curling into the cellar like a fog, yet the mice aren't scared. They're still. Their work is done. They felt it before you did. Probably hours before. One particularly round mouse is now asleep, completely unbothered by the chaos outside. You envy it. This moment sticks with you. Not just for the cuteness factor, although yes, you will remember the sneezy one, but because you're realizing how practical ancient people were in their own way. They couldn't name barometric pressure, but they knew how it felt. How it smelled. How their animals reacted. That's a kind of science, even if it was written in breadcrumbs and nesting fluff instead of charts. As the storm reaches its peak, the merchant yawns and stretches. Won't last long, he says. with the confidence of someone who's lived through 100 of these. They were only twitchy. Didn't go full frenzy. You ask what full frenzy looks like. He deadpans, 2 escape attempts and 1 cannibal. You laugh. Nervously. You're not sure if he's joking, and you don't ask. Better not to know. The torch dims slightly. You think it's time to leave the cellar. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the mice, and follow the winding stairs back up. The sound of the storm surrounds the house like a blanket, thick and moody, but you're calm. Because somehow, you were warned. Not by an oracle. Not by lightning. But by a few whiskers twitching in the dark. You emerge from the cellar into the main atrium just as another crack of thunder rolls across the tiled roof. The merchant shrugs off the storm and goes to refill his cup of watered-down wine. Meanwhile, a servant scurries past with a thick wool blanket, muttering about drying it before the air turns damp. She pauses, glancing out at the courtyard. Should have brought it in earlier, she sighs. Mice said it was coming. You're beginning to realize this isn't a quirky belief in this house, it's routine. Everyone, from servant to master, glances at the mice like they're the house's smallest, most anxious weather forecasters. Your sandals slap against the smooth floor as you walk down a corridor into the triclinium, the Roman dining room. It's modest but comfortable. Woven tapestries hang from the walls, and low couches invite you to sprawl. Near the hearth, a young woman in a rust-red tunic sits hunched over a wax tablet. Her stylus scratches rhythmically. You approach and peer over her shoulder. She's charting. Not the stars, not the phases of the moon, but mouse behavior. Little doodles of mice alongside notes like restless after midday, refused figs, and nested close to wall. She doesn't look up when she speaks. They started digging early this morning. Deeper than usual. That usually means rising damp, and it hits my knees. You ask if her predictions are usually right. She grins. I haven't done laundry on the wrong day in 6 months. The girl's name is Livia, and she considers herself an amateur weatherkeeper. Not a priestess, not a scholar, just observant. She's not alone. Across Rome, in thousands of households, others like her are doing the same. Scribbling notes, connecting dots, adjusting schedules based on mice and their moods. You think of it as a kind of analog network, an invisible web of rodent-informed routines, quietly keeping the city in sync. And while today's forecast involves a soaking storm, not all mouse signs are so obvious. Sometimes, it's subtle. A sudden silence from their corner. A refusal to eat. Livia swears they behave differently before fog rolls in, less frantic, more sleepy, like the air thickens their little bodies too. She taps the tablet again. I think they even react to wind direction. But that one's harder to measure without getting yelled at for flying laundry. One documented historical fact comes to mind. Roman almanacs, those rustic, farmer-friendly scrolls full of seasonal advice, included signs from nature. Not always mice specifically, but animal behaviors in general were considered a valid supplement to observing the heavens. These weren't mystical handbooks. They were calendars, reminders of when to plant, when to reap, and sometimes, when to bring the wine indoors before a frost. Livia's family uses both. Her father's battered almanac sits beside her notes. She flips it open to today's date. According to the scroll, wind should come from the east and there might be drizzle. But drizzle's different from this, she says, gesturing toward the storm thrashing the shutters. The mice called it first. You look at the scroll again. It's adorned with little ink drawings, clouds, vines, a few scribbles of birds. But no mice. You get the feeling mouse watching isn't exactly state-sanctioned. More like a grassroots method. Not priest-approved. Historians still debate whether mice were widely recognized as weather predictors or if this was a more localized tradition. The evidence is scattered, often anecdotal, written in the margins of cookbooks, rural letters, or graffiti in bathhouses. There's no grand declaration that mice equal meteorology. But it kept happening. Quietly. Repeatedly. Enough to matter. You're told of a neighbor who ignored her mice once. They'd been nesting frantically for days, but she left her grain barrels uncovered. The storm came, and so did the rot. She blamed the gods. Everyone else blamed her deaf ears. Livia's mother enters the room now, holding a small woven basket. Inside it, crushed lavender, a sprig of rosemary, and a single, content-looking mouse. Apparently, this one prefers to nest in scented herbs. She gently places it beside the hearth, where it immediately begins digging a nest as the storm howls. That one, she says casually, hates wind. You're watching a household that has adapted its rhythm to its tiniest residents. Not out of whimsy, out of logic. The quirky tidbit of the evening? Some Romans reportedly made little forecasting corners in their kitchens, boxes filled with straw, tucked away, where they encouraged mice to nest. Not out of kindness, but for data. Some added specific herbs to see how the mice would react. Peppermint made them avoid it, rosemary calmed them, fig leaves made them dig. Like early behavioral science, minus the lab coats. You peek into the basket again. The little mouse is now asleep, snuggled in a perfect spiral. The storm is still going strong, but inside, there's a peaceful rhythm. Livia's father returns, ducking inside from the garden where the rain has turned the tiles into slick glass. His cloak is soaked, but he's grinning. Mice were right, he says, unbothered. Called it hours ago. He wrings out the edge of his tunic, then points to a sealed amphora in the corner. We put the olive oil away this morning, just in case. You raise an eyebrow. Because of the mice? He shrugs. They know. The mouse in the basket lets out a tiny sneeze. You glance out at the lightning splitting the sky and realize you're convinced. It's strange, isn't it? We often picture the ancient Romans as stoic statues, marching to war or lounging in marble baths. But here, in this house, they're listening to mice. Watching tails flick. Taking cues from creatures small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. You realize this was never just about weather, it was about attention. The willingness to notice small things. To accept that maybe the world whispers before it screams. As the storm finally begins to fade into a slow, steady patter, Livia begins updating her chart. She writes slowly, deliberately, cataloguing the mice's actions with the precision of a librarian. Her mother adds more herbs to the basket. Her father yawns and mumbles about putting another amphora in storage. And the mouse? Still asleep. Job well done. You settle back against the warm hearthstone, eyes growing heavy. Somewhere behind you, the mice rustle faintly in their cage. Not in warning, just in rest. Morning creeps into the world slowly, like a shy servant opening heavy curtains. Pale light filters through the high windows, catching on the damp floor tiles and pooling in golden puddles across the atrium. You blink against the soft brightness, unsure whether you've been dozing or simply drifting. Someone moves quietly in the next room, maybe Livia, maybe her mother, and outside, the rain has calmed into a soft mist. You notice your shoulders have unclenched, like even your body had been waiting for the storm to pass. The mice are awake. Not frenzied, not alert. Just awake. Padding through straw, nibbling a discarded lentil here, an olive peel there. Their whiskers quiver as they sniff the air, no panic, just curiosity. The basket mouse stretches luxuriously, nose twitching as it blinks into the new day. This calm, this return to normal, tells you something important. The mice aren't just predictors of weather. They're indicators of recovery, too. Of safety. Where chaos once loomed, their stillness is a balm. A signal that the worst has passed. You hear voices rising from the kitchen. Water boiling, someone slicing figures. The house is waking up. Livia appears in the doorway with sleep-mussed hair, tablet in hand, eyes still scanning yesterday's notes. You join her as she adjusts the wax, warming it near the brazier to smooth out the lines. She adds a final comment, storm cleared. Mice relaxed. A period, then a sleepy yawn. The record is complete. And it's not just her. All over Rome, dozens, maybe hundreds of similar logs exist, tucked into kitchen drawers or etched into the backs of storage shelves. Not all formal. Some are just marks on wood, or charcoal lines drawn beside a cage. 1 slash for digging. 2 for squeaking. 3 if they refuse their favorite snack. A mainstream historical fact emerges here. While no central Roman weather agency ever existed, weather was a constant concern across all levels of society. Farmers timed sowing and harvesting to avoid frosts or sudden spring floods. Merchants needed to know when roads would become impassable. Even festivals were adjusted based on perceived patterns, because who wants to host a triumphal parade in a downpour? You walk with Livia out to the edge of the small garden. The storm has left everything glistening, grapes hanging heavy on the vine, mint leaves pressed flat by the rain. She kneels to check a terracotta drain, frowning slightly. Mice nested close to the base yesterday. I think they knew this spot would flood. She's right, the soil near the drain is soaked, while the areas farther away are just damp. You remember her note, nesting low equals flood risk. It sounds vague. Superstitious, maybe. But here it is, plain as daylight, puddle forming right where the mice warned it would. And here's the fringe tidbit of the day. Some Roman homes reportedly used portable mouse enclosures, small wooden boxes with grated fronts, easy to carry from villa to villa. Especially during travel season or when setting up temporary housing in the countryside. The logic? If the mice seemed uneasy about a particular location, maybe don't unpack your tunics just yet. A traveling senator once wrote that he brought a mouse box with him whenever he visited his rural estate. If they stayed quiet, he stayed. If they chewed their bedding to ribbons the first night, he left. Let the gods handle lightning, I trust the mice, he allegedly joked in a dinner letter. Historians still argue whether this was a real practice or a bit of dramatic flair, like claiming you sleep with one eye open during Saturnalia. But it's the kind of detail that feels too weird not to be at least partly true. Livia's father joins you in the garden. He stoops to tie back the grapevine, his sandals squishing in the mud. Mice like high ground, he mutters. That's how we spotted the hill wash 2 years ago. Nesting in the pantry rafters. First time they ever climbed that far up. His voice softens. We lost 3 amphorae before we figured it out. It's remarkable how unassuming this practice is. No one bows to the mice. No one burns incense or leaves offerings. It's just part of life. You learn to read your environment through whatever language it speaks. Some cultures read stars. Some watch sea foam. The Romans, they had tiny prophets underfoot. You glance again at the sleepy basket mouse, now nibbling rosemary with the air of someone enjoying brunch. There's an intimacy here. Not affection, exactly, but familiarity. The kind that comes from cohabitation over generations. These mice weren't pets, but they weren't vermin either. Not when they served a purpose. There's an inscription you remember seeing once etched on a stone in a ruined villa near Pompeii. It showed a stylized mouse beside a set of wavy lines, maybe meant to represent rain. The translation is disputed, but one theory claims it reads, "He who listens to whiskers is never caught in mud." Poetic, isn't it? Or maybe just muddy propaganda. Your eye catches another corner of the courtyard where the household laundry is already strung between pillars. Livia chuckles at your look of surprise. "We trust the mice. No more rain today." And she's probably right. You walk through the house again, this time slower. The storm's memory still clings to the walls, like steam after a bath. But the tension is gone. You pass the cage once more. A few of the mice are cleaning themselves, pink paws rubbing over eyes, as if they're washing away the night. You sit down beside the hearth again and breathe deeply. The air smells of rosemary and warm tiles. No sharp scents, no signs of warning. You remember what the merchant said last night: 2 escape attempts and 1 cannibal. That's the red alert. But today, they're yawning, scratching, settling into the rhythm of a clear morning. You wonder how many lives these whiskered little prophets have protected over the years. How many journeys delayed, how many floods avoided, how many bad decisions gently nudged into better ones. All thanks to a twitch of the nose, a buried fig leaf, a sudden silence. You close your eyes for a moment. Not out of sleepiness, this time. Just gratitude. You're starting to understand why the Romans paid attention to their mice, not out of desperation or fear, but because sometimes the world whispers warnings in the smallest voices. And if you're smart, you learn to listen. By mid-morning, the sun is out in full, draping the rooftops of Rome in a crisp brightness that only follows a night of heavy rain. Water trickles from gutters like tiny fountains, and the scent of damp clay mixes with warmed herbs and roasted barley drifting in from the neighbor's kitchen. You hear chatter in the street vendors setting up, wheels rattling over the cobblestones, one guy shouting about his miraculous bread that survived the storm without a crumb soggy. "Sure, buddy. You'll take 6. Back inside, the mice have gone quiet again. Not in the bad way, no eerie silence or collective staring at the wall. Just the usual low rustle of straw, a squeak here, a scratch there. Household noise. Life continuing. You're starting to realize something. These mice, they're not just homebodies. They're part of Rome's bigger rhythm. Because as you step outside, shoes squelching a little from the rain-softened dirt, you spot something curious at the nearby temple steps. A priest, a cage, and yes, a mouse. Now hold up. You thought this was a domestic thing. A kitchen trick. An old grandmother's superstition passed down alongside cookie recipes and warnings about sitting on cold marble. But no. Apparently, even the priests are in on it. The man holding the cage is draped in white, a lichus curled loosely in one hand. He's not doing anything overtly magical, no chanting, no goats involved, but he is definitely watching that mouse like his job depends on it. You wander closer. The mouse is sniffing the edges of its enclosure, tapping its front paws nervously. Storm to the northeast, the priest mutters, not to you, just aloud. His assistant writes it down. You raise an eyebrow, and he finally notices you. We're monitoring atmospheric pressure, he says smugly. Through divine indicators. Aha! Divine indicators that happen to resemble what Livia's basket mouse was doing 12 hours ago. This is your mainstream historical fact for today. The augurs, those elite Roman priests who interpreted the will of the gods through signs, mostly used birds. Flight paths, cries, and formation patterns. But scattered records suggest they occasionally used other animals too, especially in times of uncertainty. Chickens were common, but once in a while, yes, mice. One scholar wrote that mice were consulted during the planning of certain festivals when the skies refused to offer clarity. Another claims that mice were watched ahead of military campaigns, particularly when weather conditions were a concern. No general wants to cross a flooded river if the whiskered ones say maybe not today, boss. Historians still argue whether mice were part of formal augury or merely used as a fallback when the chickens were moody. Some point to inscriptions that seem to treat mouse movement as meaningful. Others argue it's just ordinary people projecting their kitchen habits onto sacred rituals. The truth? Probably somewhere in the squishy middle. You watch the priest for a moment longer. He tilts the cage, then writes something on a wax tablet. The mouse freezes, then sniffs the air and starts to groom itself. The priest looks pleased. "Ah," he says. "Safe passage through the Alban hills." The assistant whispers, "Unless it's a false positive again." False positive. You love that even divine prophecy has error margins. Weather prediction is hard, folks. You keep walking, weaving through the forum where puddles reflect grand columns and pigeons drink like philosophers. You pass a merchant selling weather charms, bits of metal shaped like suns and clouds, and overhear him say, "Made from silver, blessed by a man who owns 3 mice." It's not just religion. It's business. You pause at a stall selling dried herbs and oils. The vendor nods at you, then gestures toward a little dish near the edge of her table. It's smeared with honey and crumbs. "For the house mice," she explains. "Good ones. They keep the damp away." You buy a sprig of rue not because you need it, but because it feels polite now. Quirky tidbit of the day? There were rumors, true or not, that some Romans trained their mice. Not like a circus act. More like behavior reinforcement. Feed them different things on different weather days, watch for patterns, then act accordingly. One story claims a man used to smear his mouse box with olive oil before storms and wine before clear days, just to see which one the mice favored. If they licked the oil, stay home. Went for the wine, get thee to the market, sunshine awaits. You can't decide if that's genius or mildly rodent manipulative. Probably both. Back in the residential quarters of the city, people are out airing linens. Kids chase each other with fig branches. One older man near a well leans on a bucket and tells a passerby, "Should have brought the laundry in yesterday." The mice were twitchy, and I ignored it. Foolish. It's wild, isn't it? This little chorus of squeaks and scratches has shaped everything from laundry schedules to religious rituals. You imagine a modern weather report delivered entirely via mouse cam. Today, Flavius the mouse has chewed 2 fig leaves and stacked his straw, expect high humidity. You return to Livia's house by early afternoon. The sun is warm now, almost summery, and the stone steps have dried. Inside, she's writing again. New notes, fresh impressions. She looks up and asks, "Did you see the temple mouse?" You blink. You know about that. She snorts. Everyone does. They only bring it out when they're nervous. Means the birds weren't clear. You realize something else. This isn't about trust in mice over gods. It's trust in mice and gods. Like having 2 insurance policies, just in case Jupiter's busy smiting someone else that day. There's comfort in redundancy. You help her refill the herb baskets. The mice scurry over, investigating. One immediately begins nesting in the lavender corner again. You find yourself smiling. Weather will always be unpredictable. That's the way of things. But having a tiny, furred advance team helping you navigate it, that's not superstition. That's survival. And as the day melts toward evening, the city stretches, exhales, and leans into the quiet. The sun glints off the rooftops like polished bronze. And the mice, they rest. Late afternoon in Rome. That golden, sleepy hour when shadows stretch longer and voices mellow. You're perched on the edge of Livia's mosaic bench again, a warm cup of watered wine in hand. Not too much, just enough to take the edge off the day. Across the courtyard, the mice are back in their basket, half buried in hay, their movements lazy and rhythmic. You'd swear one is snoring. You watch them a while, noting how their stillness now feels like a lullaby. No digging, no darting, just soft breathing and occasional ear twitches. A kind of contentment you wish you could bottle and sell to overworked merchants or stressed-out senators. Livia settles beside you, unrolling a piece of parchment covered in tiny, looping notes. "Want to help me analyze a pattern?" she asks. "Of course you do." You glance at the record, columns of symbols and shorthand marks, each one representing something different. Mouse squeaks. Chewing. Refusal to eat. Nest relocation. And beside each mark, a corresponding weather event. Sudden cold snaps. Rains. Dry heat. One row even includes an earth tremor with the note, "Mice buried under wool, stayed still." It's not exactly the farmer's almanac, but it's close. Centuries before Doppler radar, this was what people used. Patterns. Memory. Furry intuition. And here comes your mainstream historical fact for today. Ancient Romans were deeply invested in what we now call phenology, the study of seasonal natural phenomena. When birds migrated. When certain flowers bloomed. When frogs croaked differently. Mice. Just another data point in this ecosystem of signs. The natural world wasn't just background, it was a conversation. You just had to learn the grammar. You trace your finger down the parchment. So this one, you ask, means they chewed their bedding after sunset. Livia nods. And that almost always preceded heavy wind within a day. You raise your eyebrows. And this, she adds, tapping another line, was the week before the Tiber flooded. They all stopped eating. Every last one. You sit back, thinking. It's easy to assume people from long ago were guessing wildly, making offerings and watching for lightning like toddlers hoping for snacks. But this is method. Repetition. Data collection. And then, as if summoned by your thoughts, in walks Livia's neighbor, Cassius. Short, round, breathless, and carrying a tiny cage covered in linen. "I need a second opinion," he huffs. "Of course you do, Cassius." He places the cage on the table and whisks off the cloth like he's unveiling a statue. Inside, one very agitated mouse is pacing in tight circles. It keeps nudging a small stone in the corner of the enclosure, then darting back to the edge. Rinse, repeat. "I think it means lightning," he says, puffing his chest. Livia leans in. "It could mean temperature change. Did you feed it basil recently?" "What?" "No." "Well," she shrugs, "some say basil spikes their energy. You might be seeing false signs." Cassius scowls. "I gave it honey bread." Livia turns to you, stage whispering, "Now who's manipulating his mouse?" That's your quirky tidbit for today. By the later days of the Republic, it's said that some households began to try coaxing out specific weather signs by adjusting what they fed the mice. Figs if they wanted a sun sign. Olives for storm signs. It's not science. It's mouse voodoo. But hey, when your entire wine shipment depends on dry roads, you'll try anything. You watch as Livia gently places her hand near the cage. The mouse freezes, then climbs on the small stone again. She murmurs. Elevation behavior. Interesting. Cassius perks up. So, lightning. She purses her lips. Possibly. Or it just doesn't like the flooring. You using a new cage? He slumps. Yes. Made it from leftover temple crate wood. Ah, she nods. Probably smells like incense and panic. Historians still argue whether these behavioral logs, like Livia's chart or Cassius' guesswork, were ever formalized into widely accepted protocols. Some claim that elite houses kept detailed records spanning generations, while others think it was all anecdotal. But there's at least one villa excavation in Gaul where mouse tracks were found purposefully inked into a wall chart. A permanent tracker. Like ancient Fitbits for rodents. You stand and stretch, stepping out toward the main street with Livia and Cassius trailing behind. There's a warmth in the air now, not just from the sun but from the after-storm peace that settles into the city's bones. The kind of day where kids laugh louder and old men play dice with more flair. And at one corner stall, a woman you recognize is giving a small lecture to two teens. She points to a cloth-draped mouse cage on her table, saying, "My grandmother's grandmother taught me, if the mouse climbs its dish twice before dawn, we'll have hail. Don't question it. It's never been wrong." She looks at you. Except that one time it was a toad in the cage. Fair enough. As the group disperses, you wander into the quieter alleys, places where ivy climbs higher and windows sit crooked in their frames. Here, on a tiny doorstep, an old woman places a single fig next to a carved mouse idol. It's not large, just 2 inches tall, smoothed by years of weather. She nods to herself and shuffles back inside. You don't ask. You don't need to. Some signs are sacred not because they work every time, but because they carry generations of trust. Of whisper-past wisdom that doesn't need explaining. And as evening shadows begin to lengthen again, you make your way home. The mice are still. The air is clear. You feel strangely sure of tomorrow. Because when a mouse lays down its head and curls into a ball, tail wrapped like a question mark waiting for the world's answer, well, who are you to doubt that kind of prophecy? The sky is shifting again. It's not a storm, not yet. Just the kind of moody, violet streaking that suggests the weather is deciding whether it wants to be dramatic or just grumble for a few hours. You're outside, breathing in the heavy air as a soft wind rattles a line of drying tunics. A cart rumbles past, the donkey snorting like it, too, disapproves of the humidity. Behind you, a little movement at the threshold. One of Livia's mice peeks its nose out from a cracked amphora near the courtyard door. Just watching. Still. Silent. Then it vanishes. You'd be lying if you said it didn't give you a small chill. Back inside, Livia's working by lamplight. Not oil lamplight. No, this is a thick beeswax candle she only uses when the air feels off. That's the phrase she uses. Off. Like the city has a cold and is trying not to sneeze. She invites you to sit again and starts unraveling a story. Now here's your mainstream historical fact for today. During the Roman Republic and Empire, especially in rural or agrarian regions, animals were commonly used as barometers of environmental change, not just for weather, but for earthquakes, floods, and even war. Mice were part of this larger framework. Pliny the Elder, yes, the guy with opinions on everything from volcanoes to hair loss, wrote about the peculiar behaviors of mice before quakes and strange winds. If they carried their young to different corners or vanished entirely, people took notice. But Pliny wasn't alone. A handful of records mention displaced mice as an omen of natural disruption. Not all historians agree, of course. Some argue that mice leaving their burrows was just a heat issue. Burrows get stuffy in summer. Others think they were following food scents. Yet a few bold scholars still propose that animals detect seismic shifts or atmospheric pressure changes before we do. And tonight, Livia says, the mice are whispering something new. She shows you a chart, a rolling scroll that documents not only what the mice did, but where in the house they did it. The northwest corner, she claims, always matches dry northerlies. The southeast, rain. But there's something else. This week, she murmurs, they've been avoiding the southeast. You pause. Why? She shrugs, not in defeat, but in reverence. That's the thing. No idea. But it's not just one or two. It's all of them. Even the one that likes the laundry basket. You glance toward the hall. You'd never noticed before, but now that she says it, you realize you haven't seen a single mouse over there in days. Weird. Now, here's today's quirky tidbit. In certain corners of the empire, especially in the hill villages outside Latium, there were rituals where people would build small weather altars and place mouse bones in them. Not for sacrifice. Just as relics. The belief was that the mouse, as an earthly tether between the underworld and the surface, could act as a conduit for forewarning. Storms, fires, plagues. Mice were seen as liminal, betwixt and between. You can't help but imagine one of those altars in a modern weather center, tucked between a barometer and a wind map. Did you calibrate the radar? Yes, and I offered a peanut to the sacred mouse bones. Outside, thunder rumbles faintly in the distance. Cassius pops his head in again. How does he always know when there's atmospheric drama? Carrying a scrap of wood. I marked the spot where my mouse nested today, he says, unprompted. Dead center. Never seen that. Livia raises an eyebrow. And he grins. Means confusion. Weather can't decide what to do. Indecisive skies. You stare at him. You just made that up, didn't you? He beams. Of course. But it sounded convincing, didn't it? This is where things get beautifully messy. Historians still argue whether most Roman mouse-based forecasting was anything more than elaborate confirmation bias. You see what you expect, and so you record what supports it. But others counter, especially those with a soft spot for behavioral science, that centuries of pattern recognition, even if imperfect, hold some kernel of truth. Livia leans over her candle, watching its flame shiver. They only act strange when the wind turns warm after sunset, she says softly. Always then. You follow her gaze toward the open window, where the curtain now flutters inward. A warm breeze. Just as she said. And suddenly, the mice are moving. Not frantically, not panicked, just restless. One scurries along the perimeter of the room, another climbs the side of a basket it hasn't touched in weeks. They're mapping. Adjusting. Like you do when the power goes out and you fumble around for where the candles are. You and Livia sit in silence, watching. And here's the kicker, you trust them now. Not in a mystical way, not entirely. But in that same way you trust your bones to tell you when rain's coming. Or the smell of ozone on dry earth. Or the way birds disappear before a storm. You don't need to be a priest, or Pliny, or even Cassius with his fake middle theory, to recognize a shift in the air. And if a tiny creature with twitchy ears and a habit of nesting under your socks wants to share a warning, you listen. The candle flickers again. A distant dog barks once, then nothing. The house holds its breath. And you begin to understand, in ancient Rome, the future wasn't foretold through bold proclamations or grand omens alone. Sometimes, it arrived quietly, on soft feet. Sometimes, it scratched at the edge of your walls, rearranged the hay, and dared you to notice. You lean back against the wall, the stone cool against your shoulders. A mouse pauses by your sandal, then darts away again, tail a streak of possibility. The wind lifts, then stills. And you wait. The air tonight tastes like copper and clouds. You feel it the moment you step into the courtyard. The breeze isn't playful anymore, it's got weight to it, like it's carrying a secret it might drop any minute. Your tunic clings to your back, damp not from heat but from tension. The sky, that ever-shifting Roman canvas, has bruised into a thick purple grey. Livia is already outside, barefoot on the tiles, head tilted to the wind like a sunflower sensing a storm. She doesn't greet you, just points silently to the far edge of the courtyard where, clustered beneath a basket, the mice have gathered again more than usual. 7. Maybe 8. Some standing on hind legs, others still. And all facing the same direction. That is new. You kneel beside them. They don't flinch. Just breathe, tails curled neatly, noses twitching once every few seconds. Their eyes are wide open, unblinking. It's like they're waiting for something you can't see. Livia kneels too. They've been like this since twilight, she says softly. No movement. Just position. She taps her forehead with 2 fingers. Pattern recognition. Mainstream historical fact time. The Romans, particularly rural practitioners of augury, often noted the direction in which animals oriented themselves. Birds, dogs, oxen, and yes, even mice. Some believed that creatures faced the direction from which divine forces were about to emerge. That could mean wind, thunder, or a god's temper tantrum. Temples had directional significance for a reason. The east was sacred. The north, mysterious. The west, ominous at dusk. So when a line of mice all face west at sunset, well, it starts to feel like a whisper from the beyond. Cassius arrives again. Of course he does. But this time, he doesn't say anything either. Just kneels beside you, breathing a little hard, sweat beading on his upper lip. Mine are doing the same, he whispers. Except one. That one climbed into my bed and bit my toe. You blink. That's not weather. That's revenge. He shrugs. Might be both. Quirky tidbit time. In at least 2 Roman folktales, collected not by historians but passed down in taverns and among midwives, mice were said to warn sleepers by biting them before disasters. One tells of a mouse that bit through the sandal strap of a soldier the night before a siege, which delayed him and saved him. Another, more outlandish, claims a mouse dragged a hairpin into a senator's nostril while he slept. He woke, sat up, and avoided a collapsing roof beam. Sleep tight. Back in the courtyard, the wind begins to swirl. Light at first, then with a bite to it. Dust skitters across the floor like it's fleeing something. One of the mice breaks rank. It scampers to the center of the courtyard, pauses, then circles once, twice, 3 times. And then, it lies down. Flat. Still. Like it's pretending to be part of the floor. Livia gasps. Oh no. You whip your head toward her. Oh no, what? That's the quake behavior. And there it is. The moment your stomach decides to forget how digestion works. Historians still argue whether mice truly sense seismic tremors before humans. Some swear by the accounts, widespread rodent migrations days before earthquakes in various parts of the world, not just Rome. Others dismiss it as post-disaster myth-making. You know, the kind of story people only remember after something happens. But the repetition of this behavior in ancient texts is too specific to ignore. Flattening. Silent nesting. Avoidance of inner walls. You all wait. The courtyard stills again. No wind. No sounds. Even the city beyond seems to hush. A tile shifts under your knee, just a whisper of movement, not enough to panic, but enough to raise every hair on your arm. And then, nothing. No quake. No cracks. Just that eerie calm afterward. That feeling like the world took a deep breath but didn't finish exhaling. Cassius exhales instead. Loudly. Maybe it passed. Livia shakes her head. Maybe it's choosing when. You all slowly stand, stretching sore knees and brushing off dust. The mice remain flat and calm, like they've finished their part and are now watching to see if you paid attention. You walk to the kitchen where the air is still warm, the floor slightly damp from the afternoon's wash. Livia begins boiling water, an old habit, not for tea, but because she says heat soothes a frightened house. She pours some in a shallow bowl and places it near the mice. A peace offering? Or maybe just comfort. You both sit again, and you can't help but glance at the far edge of the room, the section where they never go anymore. Still empty. Tonight's layers feel heavier. Not just the air, but the weight of memory, ritual, warning. You think back to that idol you saw, a tiny mouse carved in relief, placed in a wall niche near the bakery. A charm, they said. To bring awareness. Maybe that's what this is. Not prophecy. Not magic. Just awareness. Of the ground beneath you. The sky above. The tiny heartbeat of the world, translated by creatures too small to shout. Livia finally breaks the silence. I think I'm going to sleep outside tonight. Just in case. You nod. I'll grab a cushion. Cassius sighs. Can I sleep here too? My bed still smells like fear. And so the three of you nest in the courtyard, beneath a sky that's still deciding. The mice gradually drift back to their corners, their moment over. They've passed the message. Now it's up to the humans. You lie back on your cushion, staring up at the sky's purple belly. The breeze flutters, then retreats again. One mouse settles beside your sandal. You close your eyes. You wake before the sun. Not because of some rooster crowing heroically in the distance, but because something is nibbling your finger. Gently. Persistently. You blink one eye open to see the small, whiskered face of a familiar courtyard mouse blinking back at you, ears twitching. Is this a warning or breakfast? You mumble. It scurries away without answering, naturally. No mouse ever explains itself. You sit up slowly, muscles stiff from a night on hard tile. The cushion did nothing. Cassius is snoring softly beside a clay jug, and Livia is already awake, crouching in the far corner with a handful of parchment scraps and a piece of charcoal. Look at this, she says as you shuffle over. She's drawn circles, rings within rings, like a dartboard made by someone who doesn't know how darts work. Tiny marks line the circles, each labeled with dates and tiny mouse doodles. Tracking patterns. Because, of course, she is. Mainstream historical fact for the day, the Romans were shockingly good at record keeping. From military campaigns to kitchen recipes, they wrote everything down. And in the realm of augury and weather prediction, they kept intricate logs, symbols, animal behavior, wind direction, cloud formations. Even untrained households sometimes marked weather observations on walls or pots, believing patterns might reveal divine will. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of a weather app, minus the notifications, but plus the occasional goat sacrifice. Livia taps one of her inner circles. When the mice shift west before dawn, every time 3 days of wind, then a dry spell. Cassius rolls over and groans. She's been at this for years. Obsessed. She ignores him. It's not obsession. It's curiosity plus survival. And maybe that's the secret. In a world before radar, satellites, or Doppler anything, survival hinged on observation. If the fields flooded or a frost killed your early olives, you couldn't just pop by the forum and order more. You needed foresight. And the smallest signs became sacred. Then Livia drops this little acorn of intrigue. Some people tried to breed mice for better predictions. You blink. Wait. Like, custom weather mice? She nods. Not officially. But I heard a woman in Cumi once swore by it. Said she bred 3 generations of mice that could smell rain a day early. Quirky fringe tidbit alert. There's fringe evidence, folkloric more than academic, of mouse breeding practices intended to enhance specific traits, including behavior linked to seasonal shifts. While this never appears in Roman imperial edicts or household manuals, a few scattered mentions pop up in rural inventories and letters. Some farmers may have genuinely believed certain lineages of mice were more attuned to weather changes. Cassius squints at you both. Okay, but did they also knit them tiny togas and appoint one as consul? Only on Thursdays, Livia says dryly. The idea isn't as absurd as it sounds. If you think about it, humans have always tried to turn nature into tools. We breed dogs to guard, cats to catch, birds to talk. Why wouldn't someone, somewhere, try to fine-tune a weather mouse? The fire from last night has gone out, leaving only a faint ember glow. You step carefully into the kitchen and return with a slice of yesterday's bread, tearing it into crumbs and scattering them in the courtyard. Mice emerge quickly, not with fear, but with businesslike efficiency. They know the schedule. One climbs onto a cracked roof tile to eat its crumb, head darting in every direction. Another drags its prize under a bench. A third pauses by the threshold, sniffing the air with that eerie concentration again. And just as you watch it, you see the twitch. Not of fear. Not hunger. Judgment. That mouse is definitely making a decision about you. Livia chuckles, watching your face. They're not pets. They're co-workers. You grin. I didn't even clock in. There's a moment of stillness before she speaks again. Historians still argue whether all this was genuine science or comforting theater. You look up. What do you think? She shrugs. Both. Ritual is what you do when you don't know what else works. But you keep doing it when it does. You nod. That tracks. She continues. You keep logs. You notice patterns. Then when the gods throw chaos at you, you can at least say you tried to read the signs. The mice scatter. Not suddenly. Just, purposefully. Like a meeting's ended and they've been dismissed. You and Livia rise slowly, brushing off the dust and stretching sore limbs. Cassius flops over again and groans. Is there bread? No, but the mice left you a prophecy. He mutters something about hexes and rolls away. As the sun peeks over the rooftops, casting long golden shadows through the courtyard, you begin to feel the day reasserting itself. Birds chatter overhead. Distant footsteps echo in the street. The heavy mood of last night lifts, just a little. You follow Livia into the main room, where she begins copying her observations onto clean parchment. Each symbol is exact, every detail recorded. Not because she expects an award, but because she respects the data. Every twitch, every circle, every flattened belly, it's part of the great, twitchy puzzle. She pauses, looks up. You going to keep watching? You smile. Wouldn't miss it. And you mean it. Because suddenly, these tiny rodents with their inscrutable routines and prophetic pauses don't seem silly. They seem essential. Like living instruments, tuned to something you've only just begun to hear. Outside, the breeze kicks up again. Soft. Warm. With a scent that says the air might be planning something. One mouse watches you from the windowsill. Just watching. And then it disappears. You spend the next few days watching everything. Not just the mice, though they're now your VIPs, obviously, but also the way shadows shift at noon, the subtle warp of heat rising from the roof tiles, the sudden silence of birds before dusk. You're noticing things you never gave your attention to before. You're turning Roman daily life into a slow-burn thriller starring rodents. And you love it. Each morning, Livia adds another concentric circle to her parchment chart. She started naming the mice, which feels both charming and dangerous. There's a little black one she calls Minimus, a grey and white streak she insists is a reincarnated gladiator, and one fluffy golden blur she's simply dubbed Weather God. You decide not to ask if that's blasphemy. Mainstream historical fact. The Romans absolutely named their animals, especially those they believed had roles to play in their spiritual or domestic lives. Mice included. In fact, Pliny the Elder mentions that certain households considered their household mice protectors. Naming them gave them familiarity, a weird kind of dignity. Kind of like calling your vacuum cleaner Jeff. Anyway, one night, the mice don't come. Not a single one. You sit in the courtyard, same cushion, same crumb offerings, and nothing. No soft patter of paws. No twitchy noses or darting eyes. It's like someone declared a mouse holiday and forgot to send you the memo. Livia frowns. Never seen this before. Cassius shows up an hour later with a basket of dates and a very confused expression. Mine are gone too. All of them. Even the one that lives in my boot. Even Boot Mouse, you gasp. He nods, dead serious. Even Boot Mouse. You all sit. And wait. You even whistle, as if mice might respond to that. They don't. And here's where the Roman superstition brain kicks in like a chariot wheel to the face. Animals disappearing suddenly. Not a good omen. Remember how augurs interpreted bird flight? Well, absence was its own message. If birds should be present but weren't, or if animals changed their routines without explanation, that was a message from the gods louder than a thunderclap. Silence and absence could be omens in themselves, some even called it the hollow sign. Livia whispers, they know something. You feel that knot again, the one that settles behind your sternum and tightens when reality starts to shimmer around the edges. Cassius gulps. Is it going to be a storm? You look up. No clouds. No wind. Just a weird stillness in the night air, like even the crickets took the night off. Then, there's the knock. You all freeze. One slow knock on the outer gate. Then another. No one ever visits this late unless something's very wrong or very urgent. Cassius scrambles to open it. A man in travel robes, dusty and wild-eyed, stands just outside. They sent me from Ardea, he pants. The river burst. You blink. What river? He names one you know. A few hours south. Not massive, but vital for farms and trade. Overflowed suddenly, he says. No rain upstream, no warning. Just a strange swell. Fields flooded, homes washed out. One family missing. Cassius says softly, my aunt lives there. No one speaks for a moment. The man continues. The mice left before it happened. Ran from the grain stores. Nobody noticed until afterward. Livia's already moving, gathering her scrolls, snatching up her charcoal. We need to document this, she says. But they're gone, you whisper. Exactly. That's the sign. Here comes your fringe tidbit. Some Roman texts, rare, dusty ones found in the footnotes of religious codices, mention animals vanishing before floods. Not just mice. Goats wandering up hills, dogs whining and hiding. But it's the mouse disappearances that are most consistently cited. Some even call them the withdrawn. According to one curious account from the margins of a temple record, when the smallest flee, the great waters rise. Spooky, right? You spend the next day retracing everything. Mapping movements. Revisiting where the mice used to appear. Livia turns the chart into something closer to a conspiracy board, strings and all. She even sticks a little olive pit at the center to represent the mouse nexus. You don't ask how seriously she takes this. Cassius returns at sunset with news. His mice are back. Yours return too, that night, quiet, slow, a little thinner than before. They don't touch the crumbs right away. They pace the edge of the courtyard, sniffing, checking, like they're making sure the air is safe again. Then, slowly, they begin to settle. And somehow, that's worse. Because now you know they knew something. Historians still argue whether these behaviors are explainable by subtle environmental shifts, air pressure changes, vibrations in the ground, humidity swings, or whether animals like mice truly possess a kind of sixth sense. Ancient thinkers often credited animals with divine perception, not just instinct. A whisper of Olympus in a whisker. A message buried in a twitch. You lie back on your cushion and try to sleep, but your mind won't quiet. The image of the river bursting won't leave. Neither will the silence that came before it. One mouse, weather god, naturally climbs onto your sandal and curls up. You stare at the stars overhead. Maybe you're not meant to understand everything. Maybe awareness is enough. You wake to the smell of vinegar and hot bread, which is objectively better than waking to a mouse nibbling your pinky, so let's chalk this up as a win. Livia is already up, grinding herbs into a thick green paste. Mice are twitchy this morning, she says, barely looking up. Something's coming. You've learned not to laugh when she says that. Instead, you sip the watered wine Cassius hands you and squint at the courtyard. Sure enough, the mice are behaving strangely again. Not fleeing, not hiding, just erratic. Darting back and forth. Starting tasks and abandoning them. One mouse picks up a crumb, forgets it halfway across the courtyard, and returns to the same spot to start again. You've seen this before. But not here. Not with them. I saw this once during a festival in Tibur, Cassius murmurs, sitting beside you. 2 days before the hail came. Same twitchy madness. Mainstream historical fact, the Romans feared hail more than many other natural events. Not just because of the damage to crops and structures, but because hailstorms were considered direct signs of divine displeasure, sometimes even divine punishment. Temples would hold emergency sacrifices. Augurs scrambled to reinterpret old signs. And the animals? They always seemed to sense it first. One mouse climbs onto a stack of bricks, stares directly at the rising sun, and squeaks. That's new, you mutter. Livia's already sketching the pose, noting the orientation, the time. She murmurs, they're reading something we can't. You sigh. I wish we could see like they do. Wish granted, Cassius says, and tosses a folded scroll onto your lap. You open it. Diagrams. Maps. Mouse tracks in different districts. All collected by local mouse watchers, apparently, because yes, that's a thing now. Cassius, it seems, has been networking. They're calling it muse forecasting, he adds with a grin. You blink. That's terrible. He beams. Right. You scan the scroll. It's rough, scrawled in multiple handwritings, but there's something thrilling about it. People actually tracking mouse movement and pairing it with weather events. Grain stores where mice disappeared hours before a heat wave. Temples where mice piled hay into corners days before a cold snap. Even one town where mice began stacking date pits before a lightning storm, though that one feels suspiciously metaphorical. Fringe tidbit time. A fragmentary letter from a Roman magistrate in Hispania records his confusion and mild panic when the temple mice fled from the statue's feet and would not return, even when coaxed with honeyed grain. Days later, the temple's roof collapsed in an unseasonal ice storm. That incident gave rise to the phrase muse fugit, calo cadit, the mouse flees, the sky falls. Your stomach drops a little. Because one of your courtyard mice just vanished into a drainpipe. Historians still argue whether any of this was truly believed across all Roman society, or if it was more of a rural superstition, a way for the less educated to feel some control over their environment. Elites like Cicero often scoffed at such things in writing, even while privately hiring augurs and keeping household omens. Hypocrisy, it seems, is timeless. Still, there's a scholar's phrase you remember hearing once. No one prays louder than a man who sees lightning strike his neighbor's field. And here in the courtyard, as the air thickens and the mice scatter again, you feel that prayer swelling inside you. Not in words. Just a hum of unease. That evening, the storm hits. Not hail, thankfully, but a sudden windstorm so strong it knocks over 3 olive jars, tears the awning from the bakery across the street, and sends 2 tunics flying off the laundry line like angry ghosts. You all scramble indoors, mice included. Cassius swears he saw one of them brace itself against a wall like a tiny storm sentinel. You spend the night inside, lit by one flickering oil lamp. Livia reads aloud from her notes, connecting dots between mouse behaviors and pressure changes. They can't read, Cassius mutters from the floor, half asleep. They read the ground, she says softly. They read the earth like we read ink. You look down at the mouse curled beside your sandal. It's still. Breathing slow. Unbothered by the rattling shutters. You whisper, "Did you know it was coming?" It doesn't answer. But then again, it doesn't have to. You doze to the sound of wind and Livia's pen scratching parchment. The data grows. The patterns emerge. One crumb, one whisker, one scrap at a time. And when you wake, the storm is gone. But the chart has grown 3 new circles. And every mouse is accounted for. You've started to dream about them now. Mice, that is. Tiny, glowing ones. Wearing togas. Holding scrolls. Sometimes one of them climbs onto a weathered podium and squeaks with great solemnity before lightning flashes in the background. You wake up confused, and more than a little suspicious that your subconscious is forming a cult. In the waking world, things are getting organized. You walk into the courtyard one morning to find that Livia and Cassius have turned it into what can only be described as a mouse observatory. There are chalk lines dividing zones, labels carved into wood, and a suspiciously clean amphora with a ladder leading up to it labeled Observation Tunnel 1. Cassius grins. We're scaling the operation. You rub your face. Why are we treating this like a military campaign? He shrugs. Mice are tactical. Livia doesn't even look up from her notes. 2 grain merchants came to me yesterday. Said their mice moved out overnight. This morning. Broken stall roof. Half their product ruined. They want to hire us to interpret movements now. You blink. Hire us? She nods. Mouse whisperers, apparently. Mainstream historical fact. Romans frequently consulted specialists on omens and natural phenomena. From augurs and haruspices to dream interpreters and weather prophets, every odd ripple in the world had someone ready to analyze it, for a fee, of course. Even those without religious office could gain a reputation as natural observers, especially if their predictions came true more than once. So, yeah. Congratulations. You're now in the ancient Roman freelance market. You help Livia measure the speed of one particularly spunky mouse as it darts between two crumbs. She times it with a water clock and records agitated gait, pre-weather shift. You're still not sure if this is science or spiritual theater, but the data's piling up fast. Cassius starts cataloging individual mice by their fur pattern. One with a dark stripe gets called the general. Another, particularly fat one, becomes wheat belly. These are probably not traditional Roman names, but at this point, who's checking? Fringe tidbit. There are rumors, unconfirmed, naturally, that some temples in Etruria had mouse oracles. Literal small altars where bread would be left out, and the mouse that arrived first was taken as a divine signal. This may have been part of a larger, symbolic ritual, especially because mice were considered sacred to Apollo in some traditions. He, of course, was a god of prophecy. Now Apollo's latest disciples are chewing your sandal. You try to set boundaries. No mice on the sleeping cushion, you mumble that night. They ignore you completely. By the end of the week, you've got a functioning mouse watchlog. Every visitor adds their notes. Farmers bring scraps of barley to see if your mice react to it. One priest even claims the mice scurry faster when someone lies. Livia starts testing this theory on Cassius, who fails spectacularly. You know what's not failing? Your prediction model. It's crude, just charcoal rings and scraps of papyrus, but it's eerily accurate. The mice begin to move differently roughly 12 to 20 hours before every weather change. Faster movements and frequent climbs signal wind. Huddled nesting. Likely cold. Complete absence. That's still the big red flag. Historians still argue whether such behavior has more to do with environmental cues, vibrations, smell, subtle temperature drops, or if it's truly a form of biological foresight. Some insist it's merely coincidence, the human brain desperate for patterns. Others argue that the sheer volume of ancient documentation suggests at least something was observable. You've started to trust it. Which is why, when one morning the mice drag bits of straw into the shadowy corner of the courtyard and begin building not just one, but several tight little nests, you stop mid-chew and stare. Cassius, pouring wine, frowns. That's new. Livia's already circling them. Multiple nests. Compact. No feeding. No play. Your heart rate quickens. That can't be good. And then you hear it, a strange sound in the distance. Like a low drum. Not thunder. Not hooves. Just vibration. The mice freeze. For 5 seconds, everything is perfectly still. Then, in one motion, the entire mouse colony vanishes into the walls. Livia drops her stylus. Oh no. Cassius whispers, "Tell me that wasn't an omen." You don't answer. You're already moving. You step outside the house, onto the narrow stone street, and feel the tremor under your feet. Just a pulse. Then another. And then the roar. An earthquake. It hits fast and cruel. Not devastating, nothing falls but a few tiles, but enough to make the earth feel like it's trying to shrug you off. Enough to make every olive jar on the shelf clatter. Enough to make your knees buckle. You brace yourself against the wall. Dust rains from the ceiling. The mice were right. Again. And now, your makeshift observatory isn't a joke anymore. It's something more. People come the next day. Neighbors. Merchants. Priests. Asking questions. Making offerings. Some want to see the mice themselves. Others want Livia's notes. Cassius is already halfway to commissioning a wooden sign that reads Weather Consultation Office. You sit on the steps and exhale. You're in deep. You no longer remember a time when mouse movement didn't dictate your day. Gone are the lazy mornings of wine and olives. Now, the first thing you do when you wake is scan the courtyard for signs, scattered crumbs, droppings in odd places, or that eerie mouse silence that somehow sounds louder than a thunderclap. Today, the mice are chattering. Not literal chatter, you're not that far gone, but a frenzy of movement. The general is making circuits around the base of the lemon tree, Wheat Belly is dragging a dried fig into a corner, and 3 new juveniles have appeared from a crack you're pretty sure wasn't there yesterday. Cassius peers over your shoulder. They're doing that thing again. You nod. Yeah, that thing. Which means you'll probably see hail by nightfall. And just like that, another day begins in Rome, dictated by rodents. Mainstream historical fact: the Romans had a calendar so packed with festivals, auguries, omens, and religious obligations that it's sometimes hard to tell where ritual ends and real life begins. Days were divided not just by chores and meals, but by whether the gods were in a good enough mood for contracts, speeches, or war. The natural world was a divine telegram, and the people were always squinting to read the fine print. Today, you're the one reading it. Except your divine messengers weigh less than a scroll and have whiskers. It's not just you anymore, either. Other homes in your district now have mouse observation stations. One neighbor named Licinia has even started naming hers after constellations. Orion is shedding today, she reports solemnly, as if it means anything. Livia smiles politely and jots it down anyway. Fringe tidbit. There's record of one Roman town long since lost to time that reportedly held a spring festival called Muse Maius, literally Great Mouse. Details are scarce, and most scholars dismiss it as a rural joke or a miscopy in a crumbling manuscript. But the timing lined up with seasonal floods, and some believe it marked the mice returning to higher ground, another predictive gesture turned into religious ritual. You suspect your courtyard is one heavy rain away from reviving it. And then there's the whispers. Did you hear the Emperor's augur sent for mouse data? Someone at the baths swears their mouse saved their grain last week. Is it true mice ran from the forum before the fire? None of it's confirmed. All of it's impossible to ignore. Cassius, ever the entrepreneur, suggests standardizing your model. We publish a list. Symbols. Mouse gestures. Corresponding weather signs. Simple. Livia lifts a brow. Like a dictionary. He grins. Like a codex. You scoff. So we're writing de Muse Tempestate? On the weather of mice. He spreads his arms. Why not? Rome loves a good title. And so, in between mouse watching, scribbling, and eating more dried figs than any one person should, you start compiling. If the mice sleep in shadows, expect cold. If they climb to higher ground, brace for wind. If they vanish entirely, pray. It's clumsy. It's based on anecdote, half-seen gestures, and way too much tea. But it's more coherent than you'd expect. Livia even drafts a glossary: nest sprawl, neutral. Nest compression, storm. Cassius adds illustrations. They are enthusiastic. Historians still argue whether such folk practices ever crystallized into real policy or whether they were always fringe. Roman law texts rarely include them. And yet, archaeologists sometimes find scratchings beside estate doors, symbols of mice and lines like non adist, or not present. Interpretations vary wildly. Some call it superstition. Others, a weather diary. You just know what you saw last night. Because just before dusk, the mice fled again. And by midnight, hailstones fell like marbles hurled from Olympus. The roof held. Barely. But the bakery across the road. Cracked tiles, soaked loaves, one very angry tabby. You find yourself being thanked the next morning by neighbors. Some even left out spare grain for the mice. As offerings. As bribes. Maybe both. You start keeping track of who listens to the mice and who doesn't. And who ends up drenched. At some point, you realize, this is no longer about belief. It's about observation. It's about patterns. It's about paying attention. Cassius hangs a little wooden charm over the gate, a carved mouse with outstretched paws. Protection, he says with a wink. Livia calls it overkill. But that night, the mice curl up beneath it. And you sleep without checking the sky. For once, you let the whiskers take the wheel. The city is talking. Not in words, exactly. More in murmurs. In half-glances. In did you hear? And I know someone who. Mouse signs have made their way into forums and feast tables. You overhear two senators debating the omen significance of unusual mouse congregation during a casual stroll past the Temple of Mars. One of them suggests launching a formal inquiry into whether rodent movement could supplement augury. The other laughs until he realizes three of his colleagues are nodding solemnly. Cassius beams when you tell him. They'll catch up. Slowly. Like snails. Fancy, robed snails. You're less enthused. When big eyes turn to small secrets, things have a habit of going sideways. And now, the mice are behaving oddly again. But not in the storm is coming way. More like a glitch in their rhythm. They start carrying pebbles instead of crumbs, building lopsided nests in places they never used before. The general refuses to leave the fig tree roots, as if guarding something. You note all of it. Livia sketches. Cassius charts the nonsense. At this point, your walls are more mouse scroll than stone. Mainstream historical fact. Romans believed in cycles. Seasonal, cosmic, spiritual, everything looped back eventually. The Annus Mundi, or world year, was thought to reset cosmic patterns. What goes around, comes back, usually louder, weirder, and with more wine. Weather, especially, was a thing to be anticipated and remembered. And the mice? They're playing the long game. You sit cross-legged in the courtyard, watching as one particularly tiny mouse attempts to haul a seed up the broom handle. It slips 3 times, finally makes it, then pauses, tail twitching, before chewing right through the bristle end. Cassius raises a brow. Destruction of tools. Is that apocalyptic? You sigh. Only if it burns the place down. But in truth, there's tension in your chest now. Because the mice aren't warning of weather anymore. They're acting like something else is coming. Something bigger. You start gathering notes from other districts. Messengers deliver rough diagrams of mouse movement. One neighborhood reports all mice hiding inside statues. Another claims there's lined up around a communal cistern, unmoving, like tiny sentinels. Fringe tidbit. There's an old tale buried in a regional scroll from Capua, Before the sack of a northern town by barbarians, the local mice reportedly formed a perfect ring around the public granary, then vanished into the hills. The town ignored the sign. It no longer exists. Historians still argue whether it's even a true record or just poetic allegory. The mice knew, it ends. But we did not listen. And so, you start to listen harder. Sleep comes later and later. Dreams shift from togas to tunnels, from whispers to earthquakes. You swear you can smell rain before the clouds form. Livia begins muttering patterns in her sleep. Cassius starts carrying a pocket scroll to jot sudden predictions. And the mice? They stop nesting altogether. That's when the messenger arrives. Official seal. Palace scroll. The emperor, yes, that emperor wants an audience. Regarding your method of premonitory observation through murine behavior. Cassius faints. You pretend you didn't hear that last part. A day later, you're standing beneath the marble colonnade of the Imperial Library. Mice are not allowed here, you quickly note, which makes your entire visit feel like a mild crime. The court scholar greets you with pinched curiosity. We've been monitoring your findings. Unorthodox, but not implausible. The augurs are divided. You resist the urge to say when are they not. Instead, you present your codex. He flips through it. Squints. Pauses on the page about nesting angles and cold snaps. Interesting, he mutters. It matches accounts from the Apennines. You exhale. He doesn't say you're right. But he doesn't dismiss you, either. When you leave the palace, the sky is unnaturally still. The air hangs heavy, and every mouse you pass on your walk home is pressed against a wall. Flat. Silent. Watching. That night, Livia lights extra lamps. Cassius bolts the shutters. You wait. And somewhere, deep in the stone belly of the city, a mouse scratches once and falls quiet. You're awake when it happens. The silence is too deep to sleep. Even the olive trees have stopped rustling. The air presses in, thick and unmoving, like someone forgot to let the wind out of its cage. Cassius paces, muttering about volcanoes. Livia has both palms on the floor, whispering to feel for vibrations. You sit in the middle of the courtyard, watching the mice. All 26 of them. Lined up along the edge of the fountain. Not moving. Not blinking. Just staring toward the north wall. You whisper, "What are you waiting for?" Then the sky cracks. Not thunder. Not wind. A sound, raw and metallic, like the city is being wrenched open from beneath. You brace as the stone trembles. Tiles rattle. Dust pours from ceiling corners. Somewhere in the distance, a tower bell rings without being touched. The mice scatter. This time, you don't try to stop them. Mainstream historical fact, ancient Rome sat on fault lines, literally and politically. Earthquakes weren't frequent, but they were known. And when they struck, Romans turned instantly to omens. The historian Livy once described a quake as preceded by unnatural silence, interpreted afterward as divine wrath for ignoring portents. The mice weren't the only ones listening. The people were, too. They just weren't always quick enough to believe. You step into the street barefoot. Across the rooftops, you see other neighbors standing in doorways, staring at each other. No one speaks. Then the ground stills. And in the hush that follows, a dog barks once and stops. The quake has passed. But something else has settled in its wake. A knowledge. A certainty. You weren't just guessing. You weren't just indulging a superstition. You were witnessing a system older than language. The next morning, The city wakes to cracked stones, shifted walls, and 100 whispered variations of "Did you feel it?" But more importantly, did your mice warn you? By midday, copies of your codex are being passed between traders like secret currency. A merchant tries to buy Cassius' annotated version. He refuses. Not for sale, he says with pride. It belongs to the mice. Fringe tidbit. A recently discovered fresco in a countryside villa shows a mouse sitting beneath a storm cloud, framed in gold. No official interpretation exists. Some say it's metaphor. Others say it's prophecy. You'd argue it's just someone finally admitting the mice were right. Historians still argue whether the mouse codex was widely adopted or quickly forgotten. Some say it was burned during the purges of fringe religious texts. Others claim fragments survived in medieval bestiaries, misfiled as animal lore. You don't really care, because tonight, the mice return. One by one. The general. Wheat belly. The constellation crew. They shuffle into the courtyard, quietly rebuilding nests, burrowing into folds of old cloth, stealing raisins like nothing ever happened. Life returns. Normal, but not ordinary. Because now you understand. The mice weren't simply reacting to the world. They were reflecting it. Reading it. Living in sync with it. And somehow, letting you do the same. Cassius sits beside you on the step. Do you think it's over? You shake your head. No. But I think we're better prepared. Livia walks past, scribbling in a new notebook labeled Volume 2. Next time, she says, we'll be ready sooner. The sun dips lower. The shadows stretch. And the courtyard, once again, hums with tiny, purposeful motion. It's not just superstition anymore. It's rhythm. It's data. It's trust. And as you close your eyes, listening to the soft scurrying of paws over stone, you can't help but smile. The future squeaks. Let the weight of the day slip away now. Feel your limbs grow heavier, your thoughts slower, your breath quieter. You've wandered through the ancient streets of Rome, chased omens on 4 little feet, and touched something quietly magical, something nestled right between science and story. The kind of mystery that doesn't need solving to be worth believing. Let the mice fade into the dark corners of your mind, where they're nesting safely, softly. The city above them no longer trembles. The skies have calmed. The winds have lost their edge. Let that calm settle into your chest. Let your thoughts drift, gently, like parchment caught in a breeze, aimless, harmless, safe. There's nothing left to do tonight. The stories have all been told. The signs read. The storms past. And whatever comes tomorrow, you know the whispers will be there, tucked between the walls, curled in shadows, waiting for someone quiet enough to hear them. You're ready now. Eyes heavy. Breath deep. Mind still. Sleep comes softly. You've earned it.